Time seemed to have stopped. After speaking her mind, Sophie moved back a little out of nervousness. Draken's face froze. He suddenly slammed his spoon heavily on the table, and the utensils on the table jumped up slightly. Worried, Helen sat between them, looking at them nervously. Sophie shrugged her shoulders in fear, but her face was stubborn. "Soph, stop your nonsense!" Feeling Draken's fury, Helen scolded Sophie immediately. Sophie gritted her teeth and glared at Draken across the table. She had considered the whole thing carefully last night. Since North Atlantic acted so negatively towards Jacob, she would rather stand with him. "You're grounded for 10 days. Calm yourself down," Draken said sternly. Helen was about to say something, but at Draken's glance, she swallowed her words. "This is outrageous." Draken stood up and walked into his study room. He didn't even eat any food. Helen frowned and looked at Sophie disapprovingly before glancing at Jacob helplessly. "Helen, take her to the North Atlantic Dragon Palace and hand her to the elders." Draken's voice came from the study room. "Yeah, let's go then." Helen didn't oppose Draken. She reached out her hand and patted Sophie's head. Then she grabbed her hand before standing up. "Mom, what do you mean? I don't want to go." Sophie squirmed and struggled up. Helen waved her left hand, and a red beam flashed. Instantly, Sophie couldn't utter a sound. "Don't worry. Being grounded means 10 days of simple meals in the Dragon Palace. No contact with the mortal world," Helen told Jacob when she saw him getting up to help Sophie. Jacob knew nothing about Sophie's decision, but he knew for sure that breaking off her relations with her parents would make Draken furious. Helen pulled Sophie out of the door and into the SUV. Seeing that Sophie was going to be sent back to the North Atlantic Dragon Palace, Jacob blocked Helen. "Helen, please stop. Sophie's just being impulsive. You don't have to be so strict, right?" Jacob tried to convince her. Helen turned her gaze towards the direction of the study room and said, "We need to let him cool down a bit." "What about school?" Jacob asked. "I'll call her teacher and ask for sick leave. As to her study, I'll deliver her books to the Dragon Palace since the finals are near," Helen said. "How about I keep her company?" Jacob glanced at the defiant Sophie and asked. Helen smiled helplessly. "No need. Being grounded means that she has to stay there by herself. When she misbehaved as a little girl, she was often grounded like this." She thought for a while and added, "But you can visit her as often as you want." Helen felt sympathetic towards Sophie, but she also understood Draken. After all, Draken had been overwhelmed by the situation and would undoubtedly get furious at Sophie's sudden provocation. When Sophie was little, she had once burned down a building in the North Atlantic Dragon Palace, and Draken grounded her for 20 days. Comparatively, the punishment for what she did this time was quite lenient. As a father, the most painful thing to hear was his daughter saying that she wanted to sever ties with him. Sophie only wanted to show her stance, but she had clearly struck a nerve. Helen brought Sophie into the car and drove out of the garage swiftly. Jacob stood at the entrance of Sophie's home and saw the light in the study room. After a moment of consideration, he entered the house and walked to the door of the study room. Draken was sitting in the chair with a pile of files in front of him. He was still angry. "Sir," Jacob said in a low voice. Draken looked up at Jacob. "Take a seat." Jacob pulled out a chair and sat on the other side of the desk across from Draken. It seemed that this was the first official conversation between the Dragon King and the Prince Consort. "Soph is inconsiderate sometimes. You must not take her words seriously," Jacob broke the silence and said. "She has been making trouble for me since she was born," Draken said angrily, but his tone didn't hold any real malice. "When will the Dragon Tribe Conference take place?" Jacob asked. Draken shook his head with a bitter smile. Jacob nodded and understood the situation. With the current situation, the North Atlantic Dragon Clan couldn't summon all the other parties for a conference to negotiate. In the past, the South Atlantic Dragon Clan had the most significant military force, and the North Atlantic Dragon Clan had the greatest financial power. The East and West Atlantic Dragon Clans sat on the side. Every major issue concerning the Water Elemental Dragon Clan was referred to the North Atlantic Dragon Clan for solutions, and the others followed its lead. As an unwritten rule, the North Atlantic Dragon Clan had been the leaders of the Water Elemental Dragon Clan. However, the situation seemed to have changed. Others wanted to be the leader as well. That was why the South Atlantic tried to suppress the North Atlantic with force. Although the East and West Atlantic agreed to everything the North Atlantic said, they were also secretly trying to gain power and control all the water elemental dragon clans. However, the North Atlantic Dragon Clan had handled every significant issue of the Water Elemental Dragon Clan well, and had developed a huge business empire on land first, leaving the others no chance to overthrow them. The incident with South Atlantic Clan triggered a change in the East and West Clans' attitudes, and they quickly leaned towards the South Atlantic. Seeing the change in the situation, the minor branches, such as rivers and lakes, also adjusted their strategies accordingly. These were things that weighed on Draken's mind. He didn't think it was a situation that Jacob could fully understand. That was why he didn't blame Jacob for messing with the South Atlantic Dragon Clan. He blamed himself for not making the situation clear to Jacob. From Draken's perspective, he knew that some people deserved the damage, but only to some degree. It was not easy to be the head of a huge clan, especially a clan with tens of millions of members. The bigger the business, the harder it was to maintain balance. One small mistake could cause a rapid decline in the North Atlantic's position and businesses on land, which they had spent dozens of years developing. "Jacob, you can go now." "I need time to think," Draken said abruptly. "Okay, please take care, sir." Jacob stood up and realized that Draken looked quite fatigued. Jacob looked at the bright moon and sparse stars in the sky after he left the house. "The storm is coming," Jacob thought. He took out Snowflake from his necklace and shot into the sky with it. He planned to return to his dorm for the night, but he changed his mind when he was in the sky. He rode Snowflake back to Fifth Heaven. The North Atlantic Dragon Clan was wealthy, but its strength was too weak. If it had more 8th level and 7th level elders, the other clans wouldn't have dared to change sides, and the South Atlantic wouldn't have messed with it. After all, the world was ruled by those who had strength. Even if one wanted to win people over with their virtues, they still needed the foundational strength first. Snowflake broke into Fifth Heaven and dashed towards the ethereal summit. Fifth Heaven in the night was as dark as First Heaven. However, from this height, the stars and moon looked so near that it felt like one could reach out and pluck them. If this was the case in Fifth Heaven, then what about 6th, 7th, 8th, and even 9th Heaven? With the power of the stars within reach, the process of cultivation would be 10s or even 100 times faster. The ethereal summit was still covered in mist and fog, looking more mysterious in the night. With Snowflake's demon beast presence still lingering in the valley, there was no sounds of insects or birds. No creatures dared to get within 100 meters of the valley. In Fifth Heaven were only one small sect. The mid-tier sects were all on and above Sixth Heaven. That was why Snowflake was still the king of animals in Fifth Heaven. Only the mid-tier and top-tier sects could afford training spirit beasts. Jacob flew into the cave he cut out during the day and found that the table and chair were where they had been. Nothing was moved. Snowflake spread out and lay at the entrance of the cave, dozing while guarding the cave for Jacob. Here, Jacob remembered that he still had some elixir pills in his storage space. He took them out and tossed them at Snowflake. Snowflake chewed and swallowed the elixir pills that were rarely seen in the mortal world, as if they were beans. After making sure everything was okay, Jacob sat on the stone bed and began cultivating. The essence intensity in Fifth Heaven was 3 times greater than that on land, and the essence intensity in this valley was twice the level outside. The amount of essence Jacob absorbed in 1 hour was equivalent to 5 to 6 hours of cultivation on the land. While the clouds and mist floated, time ticked on. 2 shadows flew around the ethereal summit. Master's cultivating here? No wonder he's been acting mysteriously recently. Well, let's patrol for Master. After all, Snowflake is only a spirit beast cub, can't fight a high-level cultivator. What if some masters come this way? Do you need to ask? Just knock them out and toss them away, my silly little sister. Okay, I'll do as you say. The 2 figures talked in whispers while flying to the other side of the valley. During this whole time, Snowflake was soundly asleep, oblivious to the 2 figures in the valley.